Thanks for the opportunity. Thank you for coming. So just a disclosure from the beginning, I spend most of my time in the left atrium ablating AF, and my institution doesn't have an A&E department, so most of my work is quite elective with rather difficult syncope patients who have already been through quite a host of investigations so far. So that's the sort of mild bias that you will receive from me. So what are the objectives of ECG monitoring? Well, first and foremost, to define the mechanism of collapse, be that arrhythmia or otherwise, okay? And that's in effort to plan management. Because to be quite frank, the diagnosis usually will come to your minds within 15 minutes of your consultation. So you're really doing your monitoring to see if there's any specific therapy vis-a-vis pacing, which may be of use. I've put 3 and 4 in brackets here because accumulating data I think is important. I think it's very difficult and wrong to act, well, it's very easy I should say, and wrong to act on your first description of arrhythmia. And sort of accumulating a wealth of data in an individual patient is probably the right thing to do. A lot of clinical trials in syncope have looked at time to first event as an endpoint, okay? But for something which has no prognostic significance, is recurrent and benign, your time to first event is not necessarily important, but rather an accumulation of several events. And of course, it's also useful for managing expectations for those very reasons, okay? So the choice of your monitoring technology would really depend on 3 main factors. The indication. Now here we're talking about syncope, so your patients are incapacitated, so it's very difficult for them to press a button or engage with the device. Okay, so that's important. Frequency of the arrhythmia and symptoms. Once they come into the emergency department, the likelihood of them being syncopal again within a short time frame is high, so short monitors might suffice. As you heard earlier on, 2-week monitors are often prescribed immediately after presentation. And also the patient's capacity and ability to engage with the device. This is something that you have to sort of gauge when you meet the patient. Just because the patient is 85 years old doesn't mean they don't have the latest smartphone available to them, okay? And same applies in a reverse way for young patients. The time to diagnosis will be based on the technology that you employ, and that's about getting the right gear first off from the very beginning. If you've got someone with infrequent symptoms, putting a 24-hour halter on just because the guidelines say that you should do non-invasive, you should do short-term monitoring first is not necessarily a good idea. Always be aware that, that what you're trying to achieve is a qualitative and quantitative diagnosis. The quality of your diagnosis will depend on the quality of the electrogram, the number of electrodes you have, the spacing of electrodes you have. And the quantity will depend on how many events you've actually recorded. And that's a function of the device memory, okay? And these elements of the yield are very important. The prevailing principle here is the more you look, the more you will find, okay? If you don't want to find anything, don't look, okay? If you have made your diagnosis of vasovagal syncope in the clinic in a 17-year-old schoolgirl, okay, are you going to pace this patient? And are you going to act on 6-7 second pauses, which are infrequent? Okay? So why bother monitoring that patient, other than to define the mechanism? Okay? So the choice of monitor, as I said, will depend on the frequency of your symptoms, and up to the 1-month time point, there are quite a few tools to your disposal. With daily symptoms, standard Holter monitoring with multiple leads. Weekly symptoms, there are patch monitors extending up to 1 month. What you will notice is the longer monitors you have, the fewer electrodes you have. So you're sacrificing length of recording for resolution of the electrogram. And anything which is rare and infrequent, you can pretty much capture with a loop recorder, of which there are a couple on the market now of value. And this has probably been the gold standard and most robust diagnostic technique, but other technologies are coming to the fore. The conventional Holter, okay, this is probably the most ubiquitous monitor, all right, and by virtue of the fact that it is so ubiquitous and it's been a long time, it's relatively cheap, okay? They are up to 7 days, 24, 40 hours, 72 hours, and up to 7 days. The advantage is that it is continuous recording, okay? Every single beat is captured. Okay, so it does not really require patient intervention. What you're sacrificing, though, is length of monitoring, and it's probably unsuitable for patients with infrequent symptoms. But it is pretty good for patients who are actually losing consciousness because they don't have to interact with their device. You get a lot of data from it, okay? Mean, minimum heart rate, variations in QT interval, prolongations in PR interval, even AF algorithms are now incorporated into standard Holter monitoring. Event recorders are a slightly different story. Here's the typical type of event recorder we use. I have a very busy AF practice, so this is particularly useful for AF patients. Event recorders are not necessarily continuous monitors, okay? A lot of them work on a loop, like a loop recorder, and a lot of them will only record when certain criteria are met. This is a specific one for atrial fibrillation, based on RR interval, and it requires patient interaction to press the button, okay? So seldom helpful for transient loss of consciousness in syncopal patients. A number of times I've had referrals with patients with transient loss of consciousness who've had 1, 2, or 3 of these, and they just can't interact with their device. Okay? It is a single lead monitor, so you are sacrificing electrical resolution for memory and longevity of monitoring. It is very good at picking up atrial fibrillation and very good at picking up pauses during atrial fibrillation, but it will only pick up pauses during atrial fibrillation. Okay? So not particularly helpful in your AF patients. This is the Zio patch. Anyone use this patch? I couldn't find a model, so thanks Nick for volunteering. So this will monitor up to 4 weeks. It is not an event recorder, it's a continuous monitor. So it's very useful in patients with transient loss of consciousness. I suspect this is what you're using after the emergency department admissions, Bob? You never use them? Okay. Okay. They're disposable, they're waterproof, they can be worn at all times, and they stick for a whole 2 weeks, up to 4 weeks as well, okay? They do not necessarily require patient interaction, but you can document episodes. This is what the disclosure looks like, okay? I'll just go back one. Because the spacing between the electrodes is quite narrow, you don't always get the ECG resolution you want. This is a very prime example because of Nick's very flat, hairless chest, yes? Ladies. So you can see discernible P wave here, morphology, but sometimes it's just you're just not able to see it. There are others on the market now which have better P wave discrimination, but in patients with syncope, you don't really need that. All you need to see is this, okay? And it's very good at it, okay? But by far the gold standard has been the implantable loop recorder. This is a representation of size, not cost. And this has been really in the market for many years now. This is the first iteration, the Reveal XT. It is much smaller now. The larger device is still supported, but the smaller device is probably much more in use now. I haven't implanted a large device for quite some time now. It is very well received by patients. There's a battery life of approximately 3 years, and it is now set up so that there's a home monitoring kit. Patients don't actually need to come in to the hospital for follow-up. They just need to park this by their bedside, plug it in, and it will automatically transmit data that's been downloaded and stored. This little component here, which sits on top of the base unit, is a handheld device, so the patient, if they do have any symptoms, can simply hold it over the device, press the button, and log it. Okay? There is another version of a loop recorder by Abbott now. It's come to the fore. If you're down with the kids, it's compatible with your phone via Bluetooth. There's a downloadable app which will similarly download your data and then transmit it wirelessly or through Wi-Fi to a central server. Okay? This is what typical disclosures look like. I'm sorry if you've seen this before. This is an oldie but a goodie. This is one of my patients from quite some time ago. So this is a disclosure from a loop recorder. You can see a PQRST there, yes? Okay, so that's the sort of resolution you'll get. So this is a 66-year-old minicab driver who was syncopal during this event. Anyone pace him? Raise your hands if you would pace him. No? Okay, same patient. What are we seeing here? Okay, you're seeing P waves marching through, absence of QRS, quite long pauses. Who'd pace this chap now? Okay, so I lied to you. This wasn't a 66-year-old minicab driver. This is a 32-year-old GP in a busy inner-city practice. Who'd pace him now? Okay, 2 or 3. Okay, so we didn't pace him. So this is a 32-year-old, 30-something-year-old GP. Who'd pace him now?
What time of day
This is during the syncope episode in the middle of the day. Okay. What's this? Yeah, that's when he hit the floor. Okay. So he came to us with the loop recorder already in, and when you talk to him in the clinic, he's off his feet, overworked, underpaid, not hydrated, pre-syncopal all through the day, and will faint perhaps once or twice a week. We treated him with lifestyle measures, and this never happened again. Okay, so this is an important lesson, not to act on the first thing you see, and look at the patient first and put this into context. Okay, so this the other sort of caveat to this is really only monitor your patients if you really believe you're going to act on it if you find something like this. Okay, because this caused him a lot of angst and upset, and that's why he came down for a second opinion. Okay. More can come to the fore in loop recorder implantation. It's not always about pauses and pacing. This is a young teenager on the way to his math lesson, loop recorder download. The pediatric team were investigating for a long, long time, okay? He had a ream of negative investigations, always fainted out in the community, always at school or in times of sport, okay? Sinus rhythm, 2 morphologies of ventricular topics, and then VF. Okay, then he made his lesson. Probably didn't do his homework. Okay, this is a really lethal condition. This is CPVT. I just wanted to show you this because loop recorder implantation can be valuable and you can pick up things that you wouldn't expect. Okay, this is what a loop recorder download looks like. You can program your loop recorder to detect and store data if certain criteria are met. There's the basement level, the bradycardic level, tachycardic level, anything above or below that basement will be stored and ECGs will be documented. Symptom recording, when the patient presses the button, and of course AF detection. So broadly speaking, those are the 4 categories of automatic storage. The loop recorder itself, I'm talking particularly about the Medtronic one, has about 1 hour's worth of memory that it will store. 30 minutes are dedicated to the automatic brady or tachy settings, and 30 minutes dedicated to patient recorded events. That's why the ECG documentation will stop at a certain point and only symptoms will be recorded. But this is what the kind of download that we will get, and we'll be able to interrogate each and every event. Now, the technology for loop recorders has largely been driven by AF, not by syncope. And our Cinderella specialty is sort of piggybacked onto that wave, basically, okay? Because the cost benefits and the financial rewards of detecting AF early are great, whereas those for treating syncope are not as great, okay? So the technology here for in the loop recorders has largely been geared towards algorithms for detecting AF, variations in RR interval, okay? And when they're plotted on a Lorentz plot internally, you can see how the variations in the RR interval help determine sinus rhythm with variable plots in atrial tachycardia, where the RR intervals are constant, but grouped in clusters, and where AF is completely irregular, okay? So I don't think there are many limitations for the loop recorder if you have access to it, okay? They're very well received, very well tolerated, and can give you a very early, accurate diagnosis, okay? So why not in everyone? Well, it is invasive. The infrastructure is expensive. The devices are not necessarily that expensive, and they can be put in almost anywhere now, even in a GP setting. But you need that infrastructure. The infrastructure can be expensive. We're handling a large amount of data. A lot of patients send us stuff, okay? And we are increasingly being usurped by wearable technology, which is what I'm going to move on to next, okay? So more and more often now, patients are coming into my clinic with the diagnosis already on their phone, okay? So I'm not even bothering. That's mainly my arrhythmia practice. The technologies are now so consumer-led that patients are easily able to afford these monitors, okay? The most basic one of which is based on photoplethysmography. This is based on the fact that tissue will reflect different wavelengths of light if it's perfused compared to if it's not perfused. And therefore you can tell the difference between systole and asystole, okay? Systole and diastole, beg your pardon. And with that, you can get a plethysmograph waveform and make inferences of heart rate. And this is the technology that's used in most of the Fitbit and Garmin recorders. There are many on the market. I will not go through them in detail, but this was recently implemented by an app supported by the American Heart Association, again, largely to detect atrial fibrillation. It was rather fortuitous that our cameras all have their flash and camera so co-located that this is actually workable. So here we can see a waveform in sinus rhythm, nice regular pulses, and in atrial fibrillation we get beat-to-beat variation in both amplitude and RR variability. Again, hopeless in syncope. Okay, very difficult to get a patient who's unconscious to do this. All right. Which leads me on to smartphone-based electrogram monitoring, which is usually with a pair of electrodes spaced apart. The most common of which is the cardio monitor. Have you all heard of this? You seen this before? Okay. This is a monitor which has been now widely available on the NHS as well. Okay. Our institution supplies them as part of our repertoire of Holter monitors. They cost about, I think it's about $100 US. It's probably come down since then, but it gives you a medical resolution ECG based on 2 electrodes that you can use your fingers to document your symptoms. Okay? And the patients can download this and email it to their physician. Okay? I've given lots of patients my email address. I drew the line once when a patient sent me a trace saying, "Doc, I'm fine, but this is my cat who's a bit wobbly. What do you think?" True story. So I'm a bit more discerning now to who I give my email to. So if you see crazy cat lady, give him Nick's email, not mine. Okay? So the problem with this in syncope is that you need to interact with the device. Okay, so this is not really workable. But if you look, this is not a journal to which I subscribed, but if you look, it's new devices that are coming out on a monthly basis, and this is only the latest one that I found. Okay, this is a wearable device. It costs about $170. Patients can buy it now. Okay, it's called the OM Signal. It lasts, I think, about 3 months on one charge, and it can be recharged and downloaded. So I think patients are going to come to you more often now with diagnosis already in hand. So I was asked to talk to you a little about the smartwatch. Recently, correct me if I'm wrong, the president of the AHA came out onto the stage in an Apple event where they unveiled this, and this is the only device which is commercially available and approved by the AHA. Okay, I smell a kickback, but anyway. So this combines photoplethysmography with ECG monitoring. Okay, and Apple have developed an algorithm which uses both the photoplethysmograph and your activity level to determine whether or not you should record an ECG. And again, this is based purely on atrial fibrillation algorithms. What it will do is look at your beat-to-beat variation, and if it is stable, it will do nothing. If it achieves a really big change in your RR variation, which is incompatible with your GPS location and what you're doing, okay, it'll alert you and ask you to record an ECG. Okay, and that's usually by 2 electrodes, here and here. Okay. I don't think there's any basis for investigating vasovagal syncope unless they can get some real-time continuous monitoring. But I was asked to tell you about it, so here it is. Okay. So I think where we are now is we are at a dichotomy of accurate medical grade monitors, which are prescribed, and the availability and accessibility of the more commercially available monitors. It is excellent. This progress has been excellent for detecting tachyarrhythmias, okay, and atrial fibrillation. I think they have less utility when it comes to diagnosing and managing patients with syncope. The cardio live call gets close, but again, it requires patient interaction. That's not quite there yet. So I'll just summarize here, bang on time. There are many options to diagnose patients, and your choice is based on your indication, frequency, and symptoms of arrhythmia, as well as your patient capacity. And we are seeing a paradigm shift, ladies and gentlemen, to wearable technology, which is driven not by the patient, but by the consumer. Okay, but I think implantable loop recorders still remain our gold standard in terms of diagnostic capacity, and the cost effectiveness for syncope is almost a moot point, okay, because there's overwhelming evidence for cost effectiveness for loop recorder programs for diagnosing atrial fibrillation and cost savings in early anticoagulation. Thank you very much.